as I welcome to the comfort zone, to JMFM and to the comfort zone once again, Dr. Patrick Antoine. Good afternoon, Dr. Antoine, and welcome once again to the comfort zone.
Good afternoon, Brother Pablo and Brother Khalees, and to all the wonderful listeners and viewers and subscribers and supporters you have in Grenada and in the Diaspora.
Yes. Well, thank you for joining us. There's quite a bit of talking points around, and I'm hoping that we can get into as many as them, as many of them as possible within the hour that you've allotted us. But before you get into that, can you please share with us on the passing of singing Sanja? I know you're a calypso lover, and she having Grenadian roots and all of that. Can you share with us your thoughts on that a bit?
Yes, in fact, I am an aficionado, and as you would probably remember, I also entered the national competition in Grenada with Senator one of those years. Be that as it may. Singing Sandra is a lady that I came to know in Trinidad and Tobago by attending a number of the events here, several of them, and we took a stab at each other in terms of us being, of course, from Grenada in my case, and her being a very, very deep Grenadian heritage, and how we were working in Trinidad, and it was really our country that formed the foundation for all of this, as it has for many of the icons of Calypso in Trinidad and Tobago. And on every occasion, I found our engagements to be deep. I was touched always by the sense of community that she held. She was always with people around her, supporting them. She had a large entourage of persons that were like part of her extended family. She was a woman that was clearly deeply committed to family and deeply committed to helping wherever she could, those in her extended family and those in the society at large. She was a woman with a large heart, and her passing is in fact another blow to the civilization, not just in Grenada and Trinidad, but the Caribbean. And clearly, on my daughter's behalf, for women as well, they really took pride in her Africanness and in the way in which she stood up for women's rights.
Okay. Yes, I remember her coming involved at the family house in the back street on New Street and thing, and coming and hang out. I mean, she was just one of the regular people, and I know she'll be greatly missed. On another element, we saw that the Tobago House of Assembly had election, and it's come down to a 6-6 tie between the two parties of note. Any take on that? Can you share anything on that?
The Tobago thing came as a surprise to many.
Okay.
We have clearly, between Grenada and Tobago, a number of very strong connections.
Yes, we do.
And they take strong interest in what's happening in Grenada because they see Grenada as a beacon. Ultimately, where some of them believe they may have to go later in a different dispensation. And of course, you know that Tobago was, of course, administratively managed from Grenada.
Yes, that has been part of the conversation since that incident happened too.
Absolutely. So this was a surprise, and I think really two things. I think it took the PNM by surprise because there is a sense in which I believe they have to look at how they listen, what they listen to, and to some extent I think it speaks to the way in which candidates are selected, but it also speaks to what I perceive to be listening to what's out there, the distance that can grow between the governing and the governed, even where there is a belief, in this case Prime Minister Rowley being from Tobago, that the governing has a deep appreciation of what the government wants. So I think it speaks a lot to the need for government and for those in authority to listen more to what's happening on the ground and to feel it. Because I believe if there was more connectivity with the issues on the ground and with the people on the ground, then I believe that the election results may have been different. But it also speaks to what I believe is people's demand, desire for the devolution of power, where they don't necessarily want power centralized. How much of it is that and how much is of the other thing, I can't really say. But I think we need to really start understanding what Caribbean people are clamoring for, and a lot of them want this devolution, and a lot of them also want to be heard, to be listened to, and they want to feel that the interests and the issues that are important to them reflect in the way that government policies is dispensed.
Okay. All right. So we've gotten the regional, the extra-regional issues out of the way, particularly dealing with situations in Trinidad. TGM. You are the leader of TGM. Just last year, was it October? The TGM was launched, and you had that virtual launch, and in your message, it hinged on the need for economic development to be driven by the creation of a new economy built through the use of technology and people's participation. And you were quoted as having said, a lot of it is premised around the fourth industrial revolution, and it's also premised around how you make people's lives fundamentally better, unquote. And you were also quoted as saying that we, TGM, intend to, first of all, frame a very serious development agenda that is practical, driven by events in the world, builds on the foundations we have come from and people's participation. What can you tell us about that unfolding vision and agenda thus far?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. I think, if anything, the agenda in terms of the highlights, the agenda is even more urgent than when we launched. Okay. I think there's some very troubling signs in Grenada. I think there's some troubling signs in small states and troubling signs in the smallest of the states in the region compared to the larger ones. And in Grenada's case, I think we've heard last year that the economic performance was expected to be, if you listened to the government of Grenada, about 12%. You would have heard me say that I anticipated and we had forecasted between 16 and 20. I'm leaning more to the side of 20%, which means that the economy shrunk by 1/5. I believe that the numbers on poverty and on people who are going without food, which really shocked me, I have to tell you, shocked me when I looked at the government's own economic assessment for the second quarter of 2020. And the questions were asked about food insecurity in terms of how many people miss meals. I believe that the results of that shocked a lot of us, and certainly shocked me to realize that we have people at home who are missing meals every day. We have families who are certainly missing meals every month, and we have a lot of families missing meals every week. So that's a worrying thing. And I think when we look at the nutritional side of things, there are also a lot of concerns there. And all of these things are important because, as you know, food insecurity and nutrition insecurity actually lowers the societal threshold to infections such as COVID. So it's a very relevant discussion. I think when we look at the economic reports as well, we're seeing a number of families not expecting that this situation will get better anytime soon. And a lot of Grenadians don't expect that this will get better anytime soon. So what we're sensing from the numbers, not Patrick Antoine's rhetoric, the numbers are telling us that people are increasingly without hope. And I think that is quite troubling because, if anything, we want to make sure that at this time our people are perhaps more are mobilized more than ever before to really face the future with confidence. And I think the fourth thing I want to say, which I think will capture it all, is coming from Socio and Song, vaccine. I think what he says, if you listen carefully, is that is that we have a number of what I would call pre-existing conditions. The pre-existing conditions I'm talking about are the conditions that existed before COVID. Those pre-existing conditions of people without food, food insecurity, the pre-existing conditions of poverty, the pre-existing conditions about what the conditions in the civil service are, the pre-existing conditions about how people being increasingly are people without confidence. Those conditions that he speaks about, those pre-existing conditions, calls attention to the fact that even now at this time, what we spoke about as a panacea, that we need to essentially embrace a new philosophy of one collective Grenada moving together with all the people engaged, that the idea that we need to embrace new opportunities. We have this thing circulating now in our group, and also which was spoken to on a program this morning, which will go regional, about a number of statements from Lee Kuan Yew, where he talks about what are essentially the characteristics and the driving factors that caused the Singapore to be successful as they made the transition.
Right.
I think coming from that, there are a number of key things that he mentioned. One, of course, is the importance of having competent leadership, but at the highest level. He spoke about compensating them, which of course is an issue now that we face in Grenada, because when you look at the compensation levels, unapologetically, let me say that I'm unapologetic about this point. When we look at the compensation levels for teachers, for instance, right, it is absolutely out of sync with our expectation for our society. And I speak having been a teacher myself, as you know. Those years I would leave Form 6 and come to go off to get my own second dose of education from people like yourself. You know, the sacrifice that teachers put themselves through and what they're compensated, I'm sorry, but I cannot accept. I refuse to accept. It cannot be justified that our country cannot afford to do better by our teachers. My mother was a career teacher. You know, I remember my mother actually being in tears because she actually did some time in Grenada and some time in Jamaica, and then she didn't qualify in Grenada for the pension. And it's really unfortunate because when we went to Jamaica, the Jamaicans treated her with more respect and more regard, and they brought her into their program. Follow me. When we came back to Grenada, the Grenadians, all people decided that they would extricate the time she was in Jamaica and, you know, that kind of thing. And you know what hurt her? What hurt her was not the money, you know. What hurt her was the apparent lack of appreciation. That is what hurt her more than anything else. And I think for teachers, it's two elements. There's what we call a price element, the wages, but there's also a non-price element, how we treat them. And for what these people have given to us, there is absolutely no way that we can justify that. So I'm just making that point as saying that Lee Kuan Yew talks about that when he talks about leadership. He also talks about what they needed to do in terms of adopting the ideology that it was going to be, let's call it Singapore or bust. We're putting everything behind this development agenda for Singapore. We are investing in it. And for us, there is no alternative. Now, Pablo, that is really where we came from, coming out of the peasantry. In Grenada, it was freedom or death. Let us not forget that there are two countries in this region, more than any other. Two countries in this region, of course, leaving Suriname out for the time being, where our civilization are known to have been militant, to have been so committed to the ideals of freedom. And it's Jamaica and Grenada. In fact, if you look at the way that the genealogy goes now, some colleagues are suggesting that some of the tribes that went to Jamaica appear genealogically to be similar to some of the tribes in parts of Grenada. And they've linked it, for instance, to the tribes in the St. Patrick's type area and a couple of others. So I'm just making the point to you that this ideology that we had before, that we're going to do this and there is no alternative, is something I think which we need to embrace. And I'm making the point that for us in TGM, we have to accept that Grenada is our home. Whether you're in the diaspora or here, living in Grenada, you accept that. And we have to accept an ideology that for us, underperformance at home and suboptimality at home in terms of what we give. Because we feel that there are other options elsewhere can no longer be a way in which our society embraces this crisis. And I think for us, the new economy, which talks about one Grenada, talks about building social capital, it talks about innovation, it talks about what we need to do in terms of preparing our society for these opportunities. Those things are even more relevant. I was so happy, Pablo, to have been part of the discussion which we had on marijuana. I am myself, as is well known, I'm a non-smoker and a non-drinker. But I take the point that there are a number of opportunities in the medicinal marijuana space. And there are a number of opportunities in other areas in marijuana that we have been too close to. And I don't blame anyone. I'm just making the point in time that now we've awoken, Pablo. A lot of those opportunities are now being essentially aggrandized by Europe and by the United States so that we lead to the party. Those are new sectors. There's still some things we can do, but we must move quicker. And of course, I make the point that in this new agenda that we're talking about, the new economy and the new society and new sectors and industries, there are a number of these that we need to embrace. There are a number of these that I think we need to be open to. And of course, all of that speaks to the ideology that we've been talking about, that it is even more relevant now than before, and we need to embrace them quickly.
Okay. Wow. That was, because you've touched on many of the things that I want to speak with you, a little later on. You give us, just a heads up on it. You mentioned about the treatment of your mom, and what came to mind is that saying that, people may forget what you say to them and whatever else, but one thing they would remember is how you treated them, Since you've been here, we've had the budget presentation for 2021. What were some of the main takeaway from that budget for you? Can you give us a little synopsis on that?
Absolutely, Pablo. Absolutely, Pablo. And the Grenada listeners would know that many felt I was harsh when I stated in the review that I did earlier, where I thought I was very kind and I thought I was very, very Solomonic, and I thought I remained true to the training that I've had. And to this old Grenadian ingredient we have in our DNA called fairness. We like to be fair. When I gave the budget a 4, I gave it a 4 out of 10. Okay. And at the time, many of my colleagues from the NNP side felt that, no, it's not a 4, you're being harsh. But the truth is, I said this. I said, look, we have not made any allocation, nor have we taken cognizance of the fact that we have a Grenlec matter to treat with. It's not in the budget. We have not taken cognizance of the fact that, for instance, we have to take fully into the budget, not just as I mentioned, the issue of the loan and the expansion and retrofitting of the Point Salines International Airport, Maurice Bishop International Airport.
So, Dr. Antoine, before you proceed, you just mentioned the WRB situation. So you were speaking before all of the recent events unfolded, right?
Yes.
And you said that need to be taken into consideration, and it was not reflected in the budget.
In the budget, yes.
Okay, well, go ahead.
Yes, just as I said right after, that my research would have suggested to me that the only place the funds could have come from, whether you throw clouds up or you light a fire and there's lots of smoke, that would have come from the National Transformation Fund through grants, and that would have been a large part of the paid for it. But in any event, getting back to what I said on the budget, I made these points on the budget, and I made the points too, that in addition to all of this, that the issue about how we deal with the capital side, because we were talking about the budget for 2020-21, that the budget on the capital side, unless we're missing something, the budget on the capital side of $305 million, that budget was unprecedented in terms of its, its magnitude, and that we needed to really be cautious about the implementation capacity, etc., because we've had an implementation record of between 25 and 30%, sub 15 any event, and that was not the kind of issue that we could see us being, having the resources to really manage and administer very well, and I'll come back to this on this issue. So I made a number of points about that. I made the point too about the fact that when you look at the revenue projections in the budget, that it was just a straight line forecast that was done, that was not, it was not accurate in the way that we would normally do this in methodologically, because last time around, we had COVID hitting in March, and of course the problem now is that last year we had most of the tourism season's revenues, taken into the government's accounts. And if you were to just go on a straight line projection, then what you would do is to presume that you would have the same kind of pattern of revenue with the government receiving most of the revenue from tourism and from the SGU and so on being opened in 2021. And I made the point that that was not going to be the case, because this time around the COVID had impacted travel and the SGU and other things in our economy, so that we were not going to get the first quarter revenue that we got last year, so that if you were just forecasting that it's going to be the same, you're going to underperform. And as we see now, not only were my forecasts correct in terms of the methodology, but what we've just heard with the United States and Canada and the United Kingdom closing their borders is going to have an even greater impact, even on the trickle that you would have expected. So my estimation is that we're going to have some challenging times in terms of revenue, that the revenue will underperform, and what we must not do is to try to extract too much of that revenue from the domestic economy, because the domestic economy as well, because it's not being lubricated, because it's not benefiting from the transfers coming from the, let's call it the offshore economy, yes, offshore services, in terms of tourism and other things, that the domestic economy is only challenged. So if you press people at home to keep up with their income taxes, to keep up with their other obligations to the government, when at the same time they're having challenges because their business is not doing as well, then we're going to have an even further contraction. And my own view of the budget is that it was not a budget that was aimed at addressing the crisis of COVID, that it wasn't a budget that said to me that we're going to strengthen our resilience, strengthen our capacity, strengthen our infrastructure in things like the Ministry of Health, that it had done nothing for agriculture. That's a whole other discussion. But I'm not talking about the cutlass and who agriculture that others seem committed to be talking about. I'm talking about new economy agriculture with technological innovation, which can raise productivity rates, which can cause us to be more resilient to hurricane, disasters such as hurricanes and floods. And I'm talking about an agriculture that is predominantly going to be aimed not just at feeding ourselves, but at feeding at providing exports. And that's important, because to my mind, our market is so small. And what farmers are saying to me now, which is not a surprise, I used to farm and I did very well, but I could have forecasted that there would have been a problem, is that the domestic market is flat. People don't have money. And where they have money, Pablo's goods is competing with goods from John Caliste, and is competing with goods from Michael Church, and is competing with goods from other people. So what we have is that we have a lot of goods chasing a little bit of money. And to my mind, that's going to be frustrating, particularly if you're trying to get young farmers into this science. Because the first two crops that they produce, if they get no returns from it, and I know what it means like not to get returns from a crop, it's devastating. Because you put out, there's cost and all of that, and there's no recovery. So I'm just making the point that I think the budget does not address a lot of the fundamentals. And I did not hide in saying that I did not, for instance, envy the position of the new Minister of Finance, because he took this at a time when it was a very difficult time. So there's no learning curve. You may argue, well, he's been in government for a while, there should be no learning curve. But the intricacies of dealing with a budget and putting together what is in fact a strategy that helps to bolster your national development plan at a challenging time when more than 1/3 of your economy is clearly in the high risk category, is of course is not a very easy task. And finally, because it's not easy, I think we needed to be a lot more cautious with the debt that we took on. And I don't apologize for that. I speak first and foremost as a Grenadian, and secondly as a Grenadian economist. And I think it is for all of these reasons that I gave the budget a 4. And I'm standing by that grade of a 4. I think we need to do better. I think the budget at some stage, we need to sit down and have a serious discussion about how do we drive economic development and fund it at a time of COVID. And this is not old talk. Other people are doing it. So, that's why I view the budget in 2021. It did not either take very serious, it did not take into account the salaries and wages. And it appears to me when I listen to the way in which the budget was presented, and colleagues will get upset with me, but let all ideas contend. Just as they're free to speak and I listen, I'm prepared to engage with the colleagues. But the wage increases that the government had almost committed to, promised, were not unincorporated at all. In fact, people are arguing that, this could be a deal breaker for the budget. Imagine that government has a commitment. It's not reflected in the budget, but colleagues are defending the fact that if it's incorporated, it could be a deal breaker. To my mind, those are things that civil society and the rest of our society should have jumped on. I didn't feel as an economist commenting at that time on the budget in its purest form was the opportunity and the place to do that. I'm just making the point that all of these things were apparent in the budget and they were not addressed. So that's where I came now in the budget in 2021.
Okay. As you speak about you mentioned the challenges from COVID-19. We see in your New Year's message, you are on record as having said, while the COVID scourge in 2020 reminded us of our fragility, it has brought home the ineptness and unimaginativeness of the current leadership and the call to Grenadian patriots to rally on behalf of the helpless, the vulnerable, and those who are short of hope. It has also kindled a national fire and fervor for a kind of leadership that is insightful, humane, inspirational, resolute, sincere, and confident in the people and in the future. And you said that the New Year 2021, notwithstanding the persistent grimness that hangs over the world, we are compelled by the very optimism that has defined our Grenadian spirit to begin to embrace and apply the lessons that we learned in 2020. We, the Grenada Movement, are convinced that with judicious management of our national affairs and insightful planning, given our altered circumstances, 2021 can become the springboard for the emergence of a new economy powered by the resilience of our people. Given the situation that you just mentioned, and on another level, we see that there's been, you spoke about civil society. We see that civil society have been speaking to the whole issue of the state of emergency and the constitutionality or the processes that's supposed to have been engaged when these state of emergency is being presented. What's your take on that, and what's your take as regards those extended economic challenges, and what are some of the critical elements you see that are required for this sustainable development?
Yeah, but thanks, Pablo. That's a loaded question. But let me start by saying that very, very early, before it became hip, I had myself called two prominent attorneys and one comrade who is very deep in terms of his research on this matter of the constitutionality of some of what's happening at home with the state of emergency and other measures. Not just the state of emergency, but other measures that essentially arise and are annexed to that in the way that I believed, and as I said at that time, it severely impinges and trods on the rights and freedoms of individuals in a way that is more necessary than ought to have been the case to address the situation as it exists in terms of the public health risk emanating from COVID. I believe that the Constitution is supreme, and the Constitution reflects the will of the people, and that it is the will of the people manifest, I think, in law, in terms of who makes the law and who gets to amend the law and who gets to implement the law and who gets to adjudicate over the law. That really is our bedrock. And I believe in that regard, to the extent that the elements of this, in fact, threatens the constitutionality that we have all adopted, whether we are in the ruling party or we are in the opposition or we are part of civil society, that those things ought to be challenged. And how we challenge it, I believe, is going to be important, because one of the things I've said to a colleague who is leading this, because TGM can't lead everything. We're new kids on the block. We have a set of issues that we are trying to grapple with and to find solutions to, because I know that if you sit down with Grenadians, one of the great things about us is that we're great analysts, and I don't say so in a mocking way. People say it sometimes mockingly, but it's a good quality, where a Grenadian can sit down and he can tell you all of the things that basically is wrong with a particular path. Where I think we don't do as well is in identifying solutions. And I think we're identifying solutions as TGM in the economic, social, and health and some other realms. And we've left the issue of the constitutional matters for others. We support, we know, we've been following, trust me, but we've let that be a forte of others. And we believe what needs to be done now, as I've said to other colleagues, which is where I segue back to my statement in answering you directly. I just took a segue to say that there's some great things about our society that we sometimes view as negative but are really positive. We ought to actually ask for an engagement with the government on some of these matters, formally. And I believe that a formal civil society, collective approach by civil society, in asking for a sit-down, where we actually initiate it and we request that, and not in a partisan manner. The Constitution mustn't be brought down to be used as a pawn in the political game. I believe that we need to really sit with them and try and work through where we see issues regarding the constitutionality of some of these measures. I believe that's the first thing. You notice I didn't say the first thing was squatting. I said the first thing is to sit. And I believe if we can't make headway, then I think we must then do what we have to do. But I believe the first obligation on our part is to sit and ask for a serious engagement. And I know lots of voices will say we do that already. I didn't say that we didn't do it. I said we must sit collectively. That word continues to be perhaps a part of the mantra that we speak to whenever we have public outings and whenever we speak as a group. Collectively, the NGOs should come together and do this. And that is really where I want to put that, because I do believe that there are elements of this that are non-constitutional. But here's the thing. My view is that a lot of the problems that we've had, because I've seen people say things are unconstitutional because this measure was passed, and when I've checked, in truth, the measure wasn't passed. So, what this suggests to me is not, it was rumor mongering. Let's get real today. Grenada has a problem with the transmission and the sharing of information. We view information as something which, if I have it and you don't, which is really the way it works in a capitalist-type structure when it comes to economic benefits, then I have one up on you. But when it comes to sharing public information, information that citizens must have, to engage properly in the discourse of what is expected of us in a constitutional democracy, then of course we have an issue. The issue becomes that we have to find modalities where this information is made available to people who need it, to you and I, in a timely manner, right? I mustn't hear that something was passed because it might have been tabled a day or two before, so nobody has a chance to discuss it. It's not finger pointing. It's been a creeping cancer. It's been a creeping cancer that we've had in our society for a number of years. Unfortunately, in these times, it's manifesting itself because of the speed at which some decisions are required. We tend to see greater manifestation of it. But we have a systemic problem in Grenada where government has not felt that it needed to share information in a timely manner. And rather than pointing fingers, what we need to do is to say, all right, what structures do we put in place that compels the government to provide this information? That's the first thing. I think the second thing to my mind is that we have a problem where things apparently are now felt not to be for public consumption. And of course, if you unmask what I just said, because I often hear that I speak too softly and too diplomatically, well, I'm not a man of harsh words. But if you were to take that away, what you're saying is that there's a lack of transparency. And there's an apparent, follow me, the lack of transparency and the apparent lack of transparency sometimes amounts to the same thing, suspicion. And because a lot of things appear to be non-transparent, because of the way in which they're released, because of how they're released, because of by whom they're released, because of when they're released, then I think it also is something that we need to look at. So that, to my mind, is another big issue. And then there's the issue of openness. Is the government open to suggestions? Is the government really open to new ideas? Is the government really open to listening to other stakeholders? Because we know that innovation comes from outside the gamut of what is in fact the collective. It is really one man who will say, eureka, one man who is going to be able to identify the solution to a problem, so that you have this collective body that is absolutely important in a democracy, but you have innovation, which comes from essentially, these sorties by someone who dares to think outside the box. And if we close that off, then we close off an avenue to good ideas. So what are we doing about it in terms of economic development? We actually continue to drive and to build out our economic development plan. Our economic development plan for the country, and when I say our, I don't necessarily mean TGM. TGM is going to be engaging with all parties. We're new, it's COVID times. We can't move around as we want, but we've started withdrawing not just on Grenada, but on other countries, as other countries have drawn on us to build out what is this thing that we're talking about in terms of this economic development plan. And for one of the things that we've mentioned and we've recognized is that it's important to make Grenadians economically independent. We believe that while we live in an interdependent world, and that, this globalization that we're talking about, which clearly I'm schooled in, I work in, I understand the benefits of it. What it's done is that it's also now, in the case of crises, made us a lot more, less resilient, because a lot of the security and the checks and balances we had at the community level and the family level because of globalization is gone. And so for me, we need to make Grenadians more independent. Now, it's a word people speak about, but with agriculture being where it is, if we only focus policy on the domestic market without the supporting infrastructure for exports, it means that you're going to frustrate micro and small producers. It means they're not going to stay in the market. It means that ultimately they will find themselves having to move from rural areas to look for work in the south. If you do that, the rural economy is going to die. When the rural economy dies, economic activity dies. When economic activity dies, the urban community and urban businesses suffer as well. And when you do that, because you have concentration, as we have now, when there's a crisis that hits, for instance, tourism and travel, you're less resilient because your policies have caused resources to be concentrated, and there isn't the diversification that you need to spread the risk and to be resilient in times of change. It's not rocket science. No, go ahead, Pablo.
No, you go ahead,
No, I'm pretty much done in saying that's what we're doing, and that's where we're going. And we're working a lot with health, and we're trying to build out what needs to be done in health.
Okay.
And, that's where TGM is.
Okay, all right. You mentioned in passing the Grenada issue, and we see that since then our government has completed the repurchase agreement, and we hear comments being made that under the agreement, government was unable to get into renewables. That has been debunked because we had Dr. Nurse, who is a Grenadian living overseas, and he had been involved previously in the establishment of an energy policy for the country, Dr. Raymond E. Nurse, and he also spoke about the fact that we were already into renewables, and there were so many renewable solar, you call it, energy sources since about 2005. So that has been more or less put to rest, but we see that as a consequence of government not acknowledging the establishment of an not acknowledging an already established energy policy, we are really in a stage where we are going to be reinventing the wheel. How much of that previous energy policy will pertain in the new one is anybody's guess. But based on where we are at presently, what are some of the recommendations that what do you think we need to be doing in order to make this what it ought to be for the benefit of Grenadians?
A fantastic question again. Why, Pablo? I usually wake up very early in the morning when I have to face such profound, searching questions. Let me put it this way, Pablo. First of all, I think in terms of your question, I think it is that not the government didn't get into renewable energy, but Grenlec. I just want to be clear, because I think Grenlec didn't. There's an allegation that Grenlec did not get into renewables. Yes, that I think is really where I want to go with my commentary. My commentary is that government really has to set policy. My view on this matter is that government, with a mandate and with a complete majority in Parliament, really can't argue that there isn't a way in which the policy framework, and you've just told me about the energy policy by Dr. Ness, which I did not remember until you've just mentioned it, that the policy framework could not be put in place to accommodate this issue. Having not given this a lot of thought, there was in fact the regulatory body that should have come into existence that never really did. The regulatory body was supposed to set policy, again speaking on my feet, about how we're going to manage this transferal, this movement, this transition to renewable energy, and how that would be accommodated. Let's call it on the grid. Again, speaking on my feet. My recollection is that there was an issue with one of the initiatives which was undertaken, or which the government wanted to undertake in Carriacou and in Limley or somewhere. And what that said to me is that there needed to be clearer direction, and they needed also to be the authority setting policy on how it was we were going to see not just the generation of renewable energy, but also putting renewable energy on the grid. Because my simple understanding of this matter is that if we are in Guav, and everybody in Guav wants to put energy on the grid, with the system that we have, there are a number of requirements that are going to be needed to manage that, or else you create what I call hotspots. This is where I think a little bit of my understanding of the issue kicks in. So there were two issues. One is that the regulatory agency never came into being to direct the terms and conditions on which this thing should be developed. This is the renewable energy, if it's going to be put on the grid. And secondly, the regulations and the rules, guidelines, and governing structures around how do we work with Grenlec at the time to ensure that they can accommodate the energy that will be put onto the grid. And I think, to my mind, that is where I did not agree. And I think I said so before without going into as much detail with what was said before about the allegation that somehow Grenlec was responsible because the government, in fact, had a studious responsibility to put the policy in place. How can we benefit? My view is that we're going to have a very serious, first of all, management competence around Grenlec. And the management competence is not just about putting an administrative or management team in place. It's going putting a competent one from which can draw on the experiences from Hawaii, from other countries that have done this, that have actually made the transition from, strictly, energy generated from the, old bunker seed.
Fossils, yeah.
Fossils to energy that to generation from renewables. And to my mind, some countries have done it badly, and some countries have done it in a way that I believe is more harmonious. We're going to have to learn from those. And it's going to mean some retrofitting and a lot of planning. My view in terms of how we can benefit from this is that that's a cost-benefit analysis. Huh? That's the easy answer. The answer is that a proposition may look very good if, for instance, I buy an asset at $20 million or $80 million. Because at that rate of acquisition, at the acquisition cost, what I need to get back in terms of my cost of capital, right, over 20 or 30 years, right, is going to be substantially less than if I pay $200 million for the asset.
Right.
And I think a proposition that looks good at an acquisition price of $80 million is not necessarily a proposition that will look good at an acquisition cost of $200 million, particularly if I don't want to be carrying subsidies or essentially incurring a debt. And so to my mind, we have to have a careful model that allows us to look in the foreseeable future about what is in fact going to be a model which allows us to sustain the quality service by Grenlec. That's, let's call it the distribution services and customer relations. I'm saying two of those are important. The customer interface I prefer to call. And with a model that actually does now have the transition from fossil to renewable energy. To my mind, if we're not cautious with that, as I said before, we could see a situation where rather than in a non-subsidized context, the quality of service rising for the poorest amongst us, we could see in fact the quality of service diminishing for the poorest amongst us, and the cost of that service going up and not falling as quickly as we expected. I cannot answer the question with any more specificity than this, because I don't have line of sight of what the model that they're proposing is. This has to be undergirded by a very serious analysis of what the technology requirements are going to be. The transitions are going to be inside of there. There's some other technical parameters that my colleagues would be able to talk to you around this to avoid hotspots, etc. For instance, there's a strong possibility that if people in the south all decided to generate, that you could have hotspots, that it has implications for the system's stability and sustainability. All of those are things that need to be looked at. Whether it's a viable proposition, as I heard some people talk about, allowing young people to benefit from the sale of shares, is going to be a cost-benefit analysis as well. I would be surprised if Grenlec, in fact, generates the kinds of dividends that we've seen in the past. Our market doesn't have that size, and with the market being liberalized, there is an expectation by rational economists that the cost and the price will fall. And with that happening, the extent to which it falls, of course, is a matter of detail. I am wondering whether compared to Grenlec shares or shares in other entities, it is going to be as sound an investment as many believe it's going to be. And I don't see how anyone can recommend that for young people without understanding what the numbers are. I am myself very cautious until I see the numbers about what the profitability and the feasibility of investment in this is going to look like. That's the way I want to come at this without information.
Okay. It's interesting some of the things and some of the conclusions that you have drawn, because should one have listened to the recent parliamentary the discussion, where the bill was presented and so on, one would have thought that, we've entered heaven's doors, with the repurchase agreement, because Grenlec was blamed for everything from people being mugged on their way home to children being unable to get a proper education, and the granny in the rural community being unable to pay her bills. And now that repurchase agreement has been finalized, all of that will be taken care of. I don't know how much people would have really listened and heard what came afterwards, that is not going to come overnight. So the timeline here is going to be critical as to how soon we are likely to see these benefits that government or the last parliament sitting said that Grenada is going to benefit as a consequence of that. You spoke earlier on about the matter with teachers and civil servants and so, well, not specific to that, but generally, what's your take on the present impasse between government and the public servants, really? Teachers, public workers union, and so on. We saw there was a joint press conference with them sometime during the course of the week. What's your take on it?
Well, let me just go back very quickly to make a footnote on the Grenlec matter by saying that I think when we are so negative about Grenlec, we have to realize that because Grenlec is staffed and operated by proud Grenadian men and women who have kept an asset going, a high level of efficiency, that what we do is that we undervalue and underrate our human talent. Grenada has, to my knowledge, people who are trained at Grenlec, who have provided excellent service in Grenada and have learned the inside outs of these generators and the linesmen, etc. Grenada is recognized as a country because we have people who people have sought all over the region to come to work in their countries, as a country that has tremendous capacity in terms of the efficiency of those brothers and sisters, the men and women who work at Grenlec. And I think when we go overboard in selling a matter that, to my mind, doesn't really need a lot of selling, you know. I've said this before, and a couple of colleagues of mine get upset. It doesn't need a lot of selling. As a developing country economist, I've made the point to many. I'm going to come to your question just now, but I wanted to use this opportunity to say again, proudly so, it's not about politics. As a developing country economist, as someone who has come from a country called Grenada, where we've struggled for self-determination, at one point in time we would have made a decision that we couldn't sustain an asset, and whether we liked the decision or not, the decision was taken that we would get people with capital to help us to develop it. Great. Another point in time, you realize that there are opportunities which now have opened up, which makes the thing a lot more attractive than it was before and a lot more possible. And you decide you want to essentially retake the ownership of the asset for the benefit of your people. And I think that's great. And I think the ideology behind that is that as a group of people who have really championed self-determination and independence, you want to know that you can take the decisions on key assets such as how your electricity is going to be generated and your whole energy security. You want to be able to determine that for yourselves by yourselves, given the options. Great, no problem. You know, we have a civilized societies have a way of dealing with that, and it's, you know, you negotiate first, and if it fails, then you go to court, and the court then comes to what is in fact a fair judgment. So I don't think I need to be, no one must push me into a corner where I am giving the impression that somehow I don't believe that governments have a right to actually reacquire the share of a strategic asset, their shares in a strategic asset, right? Particularly one such as energy. No, I mean, I could not live as an economist or as a development person anywhere in the world if I were to hold such a position. Where I think the issues become quite unfortunately confused is that it was badly handled. I'm not giving the government an excuse. I've said so, it was badly handled. The government has given about 5 or 6 different excuses on this matter. Simple matter. Listen, guys, we repurchased the thing. Yes, they were, you know, cut and thrust in the negotiations. You know, we may have not approached negotiations in a way that now in retrospect we know that there was a better way and so on, because governments make mistakes. You know, Pablo, there's a way in which we don't like to admit that we make mistakes in our country. You know, there's a way in which countries need to learn from mistakes and build on them. But in Grenada, it's a bad thing. Every mistake is cause for condemnation, almost as though you are the worst thing out because you make mistakes that big countries make. Look at the United States and the mistakes that they've made, right? Cuba has made mistakes. Russia, significantly so, right? Every country makes mistakes. Our government needs to understand that it is better to come transparently and present the keys, because I think every single intelligent person would recognize that fundamental mistakes were made. And we need to learn from that, but we don't need to have a discussion which basically divides the society. Because I believe that owning Renwick as a strategic asset is a good thing for the country. I believe that we paid too much, but I believe it's a good thing for the country. Now, whether it was a good thing because of timing at this time is a third issue, right? And I think what we need to do is to have this kind of mature discussion without feeling, which is also an artifact of why many, I'm going to say something offensive to some people, black businesses don't do well. Because when we fail, the society condemns us. So what we do is that we hide failure and we don't learn from failure. But you have other cultures, for instance, the Arab cultures, other cultures where people fail 10 and 12 times. I know a colleague I met had failed in business 29 times. I wouldn't call his brand, but he now has a global brand, because from the 29 failures, right, he learned how to succeed. In Grenada, when you fail once, even with the bank, right, if you fail once, this could be the death knell of your idea, unfortunately. And I think what I see, and I'm speaking for me, is that where we haven't approached things properly, where our approaches have not been good, we tend to try to mask them without fooling anyone, but we obfuscate the discussion and we put the society in an unfortunate position where something that should be embraced and learned from, where we all now need, whether we like it or not. Pablo, if I leave this program today, forget what we will do at another epoch. But when I leave here today and you leave here today, we have an asset that we have paid too much for, and we have to deal with that. We have to live with it, we have to carry it, we have to pay for it. It's ours. We have to find a way to make it work, right? And how we get there, we could spend the next year discussing how we got there. And that's an important discussion to the extent that it must not cause us to make mistakes again. But at the end of the day, we have to deal with this, because now it becomes part of our obligations going forward. And so I say this because I think it goes back to openness, transparency, and recognizing that we made errors. My point, Grenada ought to celebrate the brothers and sisters at Grenwick. And I'm not saying so because it's politically popular. I'm saying so because we have Grenadians in Turks and Caicos who people celebrate. I'm saying so because when the hurricanes and our linesmen go to help, people talk about their quality. I'm saying so because when I was studying in Grenada in 1981-82, electricity was going every single night, and we had too many nights not study or take flashlights, and we have now a service, because people forget quickly, that is at least reliable. Yes, it costs a lot. Yes, we need to work on that, but we don't need to burn down the house to make the case, because the case is made without burning down the house. And I just made that point quickly. So getting back to this other issue that you mentioned, which I think is also important. The last point, Pablo, just mention the word.
Right, it was to deal with the present situation with that impasse between government and...
My view is that we have to treat our public servants better. Mm-hmm. My view is very, very clear on this matter. And it appears as though I'm saying clear very often. I'm saying clear very often because we have a long history of the same problems perpetuating. We've had these issues with wage challenges and so on for a long time. I've made the point before in a different dispensation that we need to somehow start developing some measures of productivity, even for the public service, so that we can have some productivity-based measures, right, for wage performance, for how we evaluate that. There are more sophisticated ways of doing it now, but I believe that those kinds of systems which Grenada is not good at, and before people say, well, you're picking on us, other developing countries not good at it either. So for instance, when you talk about monitoring and evaluation, really monitoring and evaluation, I'm not talking about having a department called Human Resource Development or something like that in your ministry. I'm talking about monitoring performance. From the very microscopic level, from the level of schools, from the level of ministries, How do you monitor performance so that people can essentially benefit from productivity-based wage increases? We've not done it. And in this context, I think having said that, as a broad way in which I think we need to go so that we're not battling every single 3 or 4 or 5 years. Having said that, I want to make the specific reference now to this issue where the public servants, including the teachers, have an expectation based on discussions that there was a commitment for the government to pay them. That the way in which the government would have engaged with this process by not providing for it, one, in the budget, and secondly, by essentially saying in the way that they've approached this, follow me, in the way that they've approached this, that, look, we can't afford it. Well, our position is that you either give it up or you defer it. Without more, the word is without more, without concrete options being put on the table, to my mind, is not a good way of engaging with your people. And I say your people because really every single civil servant has a family of 3 or 4 persons. And when you look at the public service, you know that the public service wages also has an implication and bearing on the private sector wages as well. And with the cost of living, by the grace of God, having been fairly low, right? For certain things, I'm not naive. I know my union brothers are listening, particularly one in particular, who have taken this point up with. The overall inflation rate for certain things have been low. But for a lot of other things that certain public sector employees would value highly in their monthly basket, it's not low. And if you look, for instance, at the cost of internet and how many people have internet and what kind of internet service they have, and you ask yourself the question, is it unrealistic to suspect or expect that a public servant today would want to have at least internet access so they can work from home? The answer is no. When you start putting all of those things in, what you get is that there are a number of public servants whose wages, month after month, chases the expenses. So the wages in January chasing expenses in December, and the wages in February chasing January. And if something happens, the wages in June chasing the expenses in April. And the truth is that because we're not talking about people who live extravagantly, we have to find a way to engage all of these things. And to my mind, I think the way in which some of the decisions are made and the way in which it's sold, follow me, 2 things, because we spoke about my mother. We spoke about the price and the non-price. The price is what they expect and whether in fact you can afford it or not. The other part is the way in which it's sold. You can't hammer that down. You can't put public servants and teachers in a position where the society feels as though they're piranha and they're non-deserving and they want all. When these same people are people that we call on to sacrifice above and beyond the call of duty, which is what this COVID crisis ought to take. It ought to take Grenadians working longer, harder, smarter, giving of themselves. And the way in which I think we're engaging this process, this hard line, right, almost unsympathetic way in which it's been approached, and some of the things I've heard, is not the way for us to go. Let me say very bluntly, I support the public workers. I particularly, I've said it before, and other public servants have come at me. So let me say today, I support the fact that we need to look very seriously at wages in the public service. And we need, because we have some commitments, we need to find a way to honor them. There are several ways to honor it. The ultimate way is that I could give you bonds. I can generate and tie bonds to performance of something down the road. These are things that are not beyond our creativity and our imagination, but it will take the will, the political will of certainly the government, because the government is the one that has to give, right? And certainly on the other side, the political will of the leadership and the members of the union, right? To feel that they've been really respected and to feel that their own circumstances have been understood by the government in coming to a solution that is good for the society as a whole. Let me tell you, our society is too fractured right now. It is too fractured right now to seriously face this challenge coming in. And there is an extent to which you're not going to be able to substitute
What is the social capital that you need and the goodwill that you need? Yes? By either having a dual civil service or dual actors doing what civil servants do, there is going to come a point at which you cannot do that anymore. And you will find then that our performance or productivity grinds to a halt. And where we should be ramping up and doing better, we're going to be doing worse. I stand with the teachers. I stand with the teachers today. I've stood with them before. You could say it's emotional because I've been a teacher myself. Yeah, because it took me 3 months to pay for a clerk's boots and 3 pants and 4 dashiki and the books I had to teach with. Yeah, emotional about it because we have to do better by teachers, particularly teachers, and I've been there. I told you 3 months. I've never forgotten that. 3 months to pay for basic stuff, not internet, not cell phone. I'm talking about just going to school, buying gas, buying books, 3 months. And now teachers have families. And I was teaching at IFE. My salary was not the worst. And sometimes you wonder how public servants and teachers make it. And I'm making it very, very clear that we need to find a way to embrace and engage this process differently. Because some of our people are in real trouble. And let me tell you the final thing, and I've said it before. And I know I will get fired for it, but that's okay too. I've looked at the teachers who are pensioners, including my mother. By the grace of God, we've been able to look out for her. But I've looked at some of our friends. I've looked at them go to buy food. I've said this publicly before. And I've looked at the fear with which they're approaching the cash register. I'm looking and my heart is really large with welling up, with empathy, because these are people who gave to our society, man. Look, man, some of these people took you home, right? And I'm talking about a good lady who is related to me called Mrs. Antoine, who taught at Heinz, Timothy Antoine's mother. She took you home rather than mixed class. She would leave school when the bell rings, but take you home to do extra lessons, right? And her story is not unique. There are teachers who are buying pencil and books and pads and medication. And I speak my colleagues in the public workers, arena about teaching because I've been there, not because your cause is any less, right? But you have people who took you home on their measly salary and they're giving you sandwich and juice and they're spending hours with you and they're not taking a cent more. And you look at a lot of these people today, clearly, not Mrs. Antoine, I say so smilingly, God bless her soul, I told that to her sons. But you look at teachers like that, and you look at a lot of them retired now, and they can't sustain themselves in the way that you would expect, that we would want to hold up. Citizens of our country who have given of themselves to our development process. Were it not for people like that, people like me may not have been. People like Eddie Patrick may not have been. We have to do better, and the way in which we engage it, even if we can't pay the price factor, the way in which we engage it has to be, look guys, we appreciate you, we lift you up, we celebrate you because we know the struggles that you've been through and the sacrifices you've made to build this society of ours. Yeah, we have Grenadians all over who, were it not for these people, would not have been anywhere. And look, let me tell you, I've looked at countries where teachers have not done this. And you look at the number of people falling on the wayside, and you say, but for the grace of God, at our time, many of us could have been there too. My friend, I stand with the teachers today. I want to be redundant on this program today in saying that we need to engage them, lift them up as a society, and find the best solution out of this. Because if we can find money for other things that we've bought at cost, to my mind, that are inflated relative to valuations, we have to be able to find the wages for the teachers. And I'm not stupid. I understand one is a one-off expense, and I understand one is continuous. It is an expense that we have to bear now and bear in the future. But when you look at our society, if we're not able to do that, it doesn't speak very much of our society at this time. And we can't, for the sake of numbers, impoverish our society to a stage where it impacts on the very seeds of innovation, sacrifice that we want to see go forward.
Yeah, it's interesting that you speak about, there should be an alternative approach, because the the unions in the press conference, they did indicate that they presented an alternative recommendation to government, and they put it to them in writing on the first working day of this year, and they haven't had a written response to that, save and except to say recently they just wrote to them, they got this urgent letter saying that, you know, their position still stands. Our final question for this afternoon, because I can see that your hour has actually gone.
This is like my coming up to you and the comrades. Antoine, God bless him wherever he is. In war, coming up for an hour and a half and not wanting to leave because the real vibe and the pulse of the thing is so great that time passes. Go ahead.
Yeah, but in any event, that's our final question. You spoke in your, excuse me, in your New Year's message, you also said that by bringing everyone on board, including Grenadians abroad, we believe that we can forge that development agenda, not just a plan for but a development agenda that is going to be very different from what we see on the ground right now. That is really what we want to do as TGM to improve people's lives. Now, being diaspora specific here, I want to share with you something that came out of a Facebook conversation, and it had to do with the diaspora's contribution. And there was a contribution to the conversation that went like this. Given the significance of finances from the diaspora to our upkeep, is it possible to establish a construct among them to develop a financial base that can be used to fund income-generating projects at home, where a parallel home-based entity will collaborate, coordinate, plan, implement, and help to manage these projects? What's your take on that? Do you think it is something that is doable in terms of developing a structured approach for the development and involvement of our diaspora in our domestic economy?
Yeah, thanks. I missed that discussion, but I want to say that I believe that we have not yet touched, though we've spoken about it, the surface of the diaspora interface with our domestic economy and the opportunities that exist in the domestic economy that can, in fact, be supported, not just funded, but supported by the diaspora. Let me just say the following. I think that COVID has brought an opportunity for us to use the resources in the diaspora, in engineering, in information and communications technology, in agriculture, in distribution, in logistics chain management, in banking, in insurance, in a range of areas, in medicine. We have so many areas where there are Grenadians outside who we could now be tapping into to make a contribution at home. And it is in that way that I want to say that we've not done that, and let's call this diaspora exchange as an area that we now need to drill down into. And in the area of finance, my thoughts around this are that engagement with the diaspora is actually beneficial. My view is that there are a number of young people, and I'm throwing this out for the first time, who have a number of innovative ideas, who can find part funding in Grenada from family connections, as is typical in other developing countries. But they can also get support and guidance and shepherding from Grenadians abroad, many of whom are retired, some of whom are not retired and are active, but can help to make connections for them, as well as connecting them to capital. And I think that is the biggest contribution, not just the capital of Grenadians, but opportunities that Grenadians in the diaspora, I have friends in Canada, as do you, in banking and finance, who, for instance, can help connect our young people, right, and not so young, with opportunities for financing and partnership in countries like the United States, where we can get both capital and technology transferred. This is not up in the air. I have, for instance, now, in my own small way, I have directed a number of small entities in Grenada to capital outside. In my own small way, I believe that if we were to institutionalize that, and I'm not talking about government now, step back from the government, please.
Yeah, I'm talking about something separate and up.
Absolutely.
That's the perspective here. True.
Absolutely. Right? Where, for instance, I have friends in the United States who are saying to me now, they expect that Grenadians at a particular stage who have been in North America and elsewhere for a long time will want to come home after COVID. A number of them don't want to die away from Grenada, and this reality of facing death has brought with it a new realization of their mortality. It happened after 9/11, and they want to invest in ventures in Grenada to help build homes in Grenada for a number of the people who are going to be coming back to Grenada, but they don't want to go to 2 years and 3 years of fighting up and some of them dying in dealing with contractors. So they now want to be able to link with some people at home who basically they can finance, but they want credible people. And that brings me to my last point, because you see, you know, we in Grenada are smart people. Smart, I say, in a smiling way, because we've had too many instances where people have stayed abroad and they've sent money and the houses have not been built. That's a fact. I suffered from it in my own family. Point of fact is that I think what we need is structures now. So if we can get, for instance, Pablo, a pool of private sector people with credible people involved, with credible articles of association, with credible management, with a credible, the way that projects are done, a project person that's independent, that can validate projects at various stages. That kind of things that Grenadians in North America are used to. So you can put your money and turn your back and go back to work, rather than worrying if the $100,000 I send you is going to be used to buy material for my house or for somebody else's house, or the pictures that are seen is really pictures of the house that we're sponsoring as part of the venture, or somebody else's house down the road. If they can get that kind of certainty and credibility, we will see a lot more capital coming in. So we need to fix the institutional architecture for this, and Grenadians have not become very used to the idea of pooling resources at home. Jamaicans are doing it very well, and there are so many small enterprises on the Jamaica junior stock market that benefit from these kinds of arrangements. The stock market provides the certainty, because you have to reach to a particular stage to be listed. We don't have that. We don't have a junior stock exchange or stock market. So we now need to mimic this by having credible tight institutional arrangements with credible people, credible firms, for instance, that allow someone to invest where they know that they will get a 10% return, but it's not just the return, that's the price factor. It's the non-price factor of contributing to development in Grenada, so they can say, look, we have a project that we're funding in Grenada where we're building 30 homes or 50 homes. Yes? So that's the kind of thing I think we need to see. And it's not just homes. It's also products that we have. So many products that young people have ideas on, that sometimes you travel to North America and Europe and you see the same products, essentially products that we could have produced, but we don't have the links to market. And when you look at the products, it's not rocket science technology. For instance, the issue with source of teas. Jamaica has a company that's on the junior stock market now. I think they're called Jamaican Teas. I'll give you the name. But all they do is produce all of these teas from these local type, agro ventures, soursop and other things. They're on the junior stock market, and they're doing very well. So Pablo, you can get a broker and buy into them. And that's the kind of thing that ultimately I think we need to see emerge. And I've said this to other colleagues in the Eastern Caribbean, and it's a point I want to make on a program coming up, where I'm speaking about what the Eastern Caribbean needs to do and the OECS needs to do in making sure that we now start engaging finance abroad in the diaspora with opportunities at home. And this is in all areas. Young people who want to get into, animation. But who are they going to do it for? Well, if Pablo has a company that does advertising for a company that wants animation, I can hook up Pablo with the young people at home. And of course, once you start to get into these other sectors that form part of what we call the new economy, we start to get into the same types of issues that we said are the pre-existing conditions. The cost of the internet, the speed of the internet, the bandwidth. Can I upload? Can I work credibly? So that really, in repositioning and rethinking where this Grenada needs to be, including the idea that you put on what we can do with the diaspora, we now need to engage a new process of very quickly coming to what I call these low-hanging fruit opportunities. And this is what it will take. So Pablo, excellent question. If we don't face the future with this kind of certainty, we're going to get more and more hotels. Nothing's wrong with hotels, you know, but something's wrong with hotel development at the exclusion of the things that are intended to diversify us. Because if you read, for instance, the Millennium Report, you hear that these super viruses are going to proliferate in this century, so that many people actually are surprised. And yes, they're surprised by COVID, but the truth is that the reports for the Millennium actually tell us that the risks that will impact global growth and global development will be these viruses. And of course, what we need to do now is to build up our resilience at the community level, at the national level, using all our resources, including those in the diaspora, so that when we have another crisis of this nature, we are going to be better positioned. But more importantly, and that's my last word, coming out of this crisis, we can position ourselves now by embracing and engaging opportunities that we did not embrace and engage before COVID. If we do nothing different, we will come out of this crisis weaker, where other countries and other people in other countries will engage these opportunities, but we will not have. And the gap between those who do well and those who don't do well, like ourselves, will continue to grow. And with that growing gap, our young people looking at the opportunities, the lifestyle changes, right? The creature comforts, the demands that they see and that are generated by these lifestyle things that they see outside. Those demands will grow, and our society will become less and less capable of actually satisfying them, not because they're not prepared to work or embrace them, but because our society is not so structured, is not so reorganized to allow them to benefit from these new sectors that are emerging in the new economy all over the world. My last words. Thank you so much.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Antoine. I mean, you've gone past the hour that you had committed to, and it was good having you. And I would hope that that diaspora element, which I believe is so critical, given the potential that it has, both in terms of providing financing, but also providing the opportunities that you mentioned in terms of our products being, getting access to markets out there. I am hoping that there would be some kind of concerted effort being made to get our diaspora into a more cohesive sort of unit that can provide that kind of financial base, that can look at those local projects, those income-generating projects and possibilities out here in a professional and organized way, right? That can help to address some of the challenges that we face, especially in rural communities. And given the fact that very early in your conversation you spoke about people going to bed hungry. So if we don't begin to address those economic issues, those challenges, especially in the rural communities right now, we know what is awaiting us down the road. So thank you once again for taking the time off to be here with us on the Comfort Zone, and I'm certain that our viewers and listeners would have come away from here very much more edified on those issues that we spoke to. Thank you.
Pablo, thank you for having me. Brother Khalis, thank you for having me. It's always a joy.
Thank you.
I really look forward to being able to sit with you, Brother Pablo in Grenada, the beautiful people of Guam. And before I leave, I want to say that there's a young man who we have just been told lost his life, and from PVC, a student. And
yes, I saw that. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
yes, and having spent one year at that institution myself, which of course is very important to me, I just want to basically say to the family of Joshua Baldio from St. George's Northeast that our prayers are with them, and one of our members, her son, is actually close and is known to Joshua and the entire class, I'm told, and families and mothers and fathers of those who are close to him are also finding themselves having to face the very unenviable task of explaining to kids at 12 and 13 what death means. And even at this time, as we wrap up this program, I think the profundity that we all joined in this thing, regardless of what we perceive, sometimes we believe that we are essentially made of Teflon, the way that we talk sometimes. At the end of the day, I don't know and you don't know when it's going to be the last time. And we're called upon to love each other. Let us, we can agree without being disagreeable, and all ideas can contend, but at the end of the day, I think we need to find the love that the students in PBC, and the solidarity that I'm seeing coming from parents of those who are close to the young man. Their sons are close to him. That solidarity and that love, we need as a society to emulate. And I just wanted to leave with that, because out of the clear darkness of this, we must find light. And the light is that we're called upon to love and to support each other as Grenadians.
Okay. All right. Thank you again, Dr. Antoine. And we look forward to having you sometime again in the future. Right.
Always my pleasure. Always my pleasure. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
All the best. Yes, so that's it. There you had it. Dr. Patrick Antoine being with us on the comfort zone this afternoon.